Hi everyone. So to preface this talk, I did speak to a lot of people when I flew in to New Zealand. So I did change some of my slides to make it not just about game design, but about making sustainable businesses and about essentially how you should approach virtual and augmented reality game development as content creators that are looking to essentially develop past your first title. So some of these tips will go beyond just game design, and they'll also move into business development as well, and how to produce content and how to do it ethically and sustainably. Great. So thank you for the introduction. That was really great. My background is that I was a 2D artist or a concept artist, and I was also a material and texture artist, and then I became a game designer, a producer, and now I essentially don't do anything to do with games, and I look at Excel spreadsheets all day, and I write emails. So not the fun stuff. Don't ever go too far. That's too far into games. Basically, we were one of the first developers to work with motion mapping in virtual reality, and also we've been working with the Vive since they were available to developers. That has given us the ability to create things like the virtual dementia experience and Earthlight. So we've been very interested in things like empathic teaching tools in virtual reality, or about making experiences that are authentic and deliver a subject matter to a player with a level of presence and agency, which I did a talk about a little while ago. So what is Opaque Space? Opaque Space is a HTC ViveX funded company. We're a part of their incubator programs, and we've been working on Earthlight since about the end of 2015. That's given us access to collaborators such as NASA, the European Space Agency, and other parties as well, some which we can't talk about. But obviously we don't work with the military or anything like that. So we only work in the fields of educational, entertainment, and enterprise, or serious games. And we've got a lot of work coming up now with museums and educational institutions as well as our work with NASA, which involves doing virtual reality training for astronauts. So what's Earthlight? Real quickly, it's a game that puts you in the shoes of being an astronaut, and we essentially train you and deploy you onto the ISS. I get asked a lot about the target demographic, and we've kind of approached this as basically everybody. So I've had kids as young as 4, or people as old as 80 kind of play their EVA experiences on Earthlight, and to us it's a very universal kind of goal to bring space to not just 30-something-year-old astronauts in virtual reality at the NASA Hybrid Reality Laboratory, but also into people's living rooms. And yeah, so this is just a bit of a little bit of a video from Earthlight. So this is using the HTC Vive. The original build of Earthlight was using the Connect 2 to map your hands onto your avatar with the Oculus dev kits. So we've been looking at essentially using motion mapping for interactive VR designs since before the motion map controllers were available. And we've found a lot of kind of lessons and a lot of kind of case studies that we can derive from that, which I can talk about a little bit more. And that's done. So the last thing that we've been doing is to provide hybrid reality solutions with the Hybrid Reality Laboratory. Coincidence? I think not. At NASA. So what we did was we went in March, we got to head over there and try our game at the active response gravity offload system at the NASA Hybrid Reality Laboratory, and see what putting a person into a simulated microgravity environment would do with virtual reality. And we had some really interesting results. For example, when you have tactile and haptic feedback and you're able to grab onto physical objects, you don't actually notice that your hands don't exist within the virtual reality environment. So when players like myself were grabbing these handlebars that you see on the picture there, I had no idea that I couldn't see my hands anymore, because I'm not, I don't have any controllers. My mind was able to kind of map where my hands were, and in this really weird way, as long as I could touch an object and predict where I could touch an object, I became quite confident in virtual reality. And by the end of the experience, I could not really tell that I was in a very artificial environment. So What does this mean, essentially? So using Earthlight as a case study, what does this mean for you as virtual reality content developers or people looking to make sustainable businesses? So Earthlight began as just a game that was aimed at a Steam VR consumer-facing release, but it's become a lot more since then. Our first tour at NASA to get references and research materials has evolved into doing an active collaboration with them, and that's evolved into us looking at how our game can be used for enterprise solutions. So agnostic of Earthlight, my advice to everybody is essentially looking at how you can deploy your content across multiple platforms and across multiple uses in multiple ways. And an example of this is you saw the space thing, but we've also jerried up Earthlight to become a representation of astronaut training at the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory at the Sony Carter facility in Houston. So what it is we've taken the game, we've made a training tool out of it, but it's still a part of the game. And this becomes a part of the tutorial kind of stuff that we do for Earthlight for players to learn how to be astronauts before we blast them off into space. So, what's virtual reality? What does the environment look like? VR is 4.5 million VR mobile units. Now, keep in mind that these numbers are not representative of active mobile VR users. They are VR-ready mobile units. And that's a really important kind of distinction to make for people when selecting their content development pipeline. So it doesn't mean that you're going to have 4.5 million audience members. It just means that you can potentially have that number. It's 450,000 plus PSVR units. So one of the things that happened last year was that there was a lot of market correction, and we actually did not think that Sony was going to sell up to 1 million PSVR units, and here they are. That's a really pessimistic number based on kind of like the metrics that we have of tracking that, and Sony's been kind of waving that around to everybody. So when developing content, especially that's motion mapped and especially that has access to things like Oculus Touch and HTC Vive, always keep in mind that you can also think about a supplementary piece of content that can deploy to PSVR. Now, these can be shorter experiences or things that are on a tangent of your original experiences. So if you're making a game about zombies or something, make another game about zombies on PSVR using the assets that you've already developed. Now, for those of you that have worked with consoles before, certification is quite lengthy and difficult, and the technical pipelines require you to get access to dev kits, and Sony has been pretty good about that kind of stuff. There's 420,000 HTC Vive units as well in the ecosystem, including the dev kits. Those of you that have worked with the dev kits previously, stop, burn them, get rid of them. We need them out of the ecosystem. They're very unreliable. But this gives you an idea of what you can kind of deploy to. Now, this number also includes a number of interesting use cases, such as deployment on arcades, deployment in installations, and deployments in entertainment centers. So a single arcade, for example, could have up to 20 or 30 HTC Vive units. And we know that, for example, HTC offers discounts only for Vive orders that start at 100 units plus. So from that type of, business model, we can extrapolate that there is bulk volume of HTC Vives that are going to installations or bulk orders with a number of kind of bodies that are buying them at a time. So that would inform you to make content that can also target things like arcade and installation deployments. Now we have 250,000 Oculus Rift units. This number is really kind of speculative because people are looking at tracking and delivery numbers, and this also includes the DK1 and DK2 units. So when making stuff, try to see how much of that platform you can cover, and targeting the end user for just Steam releases, for example, it's not a very sustainable way of looking at your content release. So if you're making singular content that's going to target that, we do know that one of the metrics that we have of looking at successful VR content is Job Simulator. They made about $3 million, but they were the most successful VR content release that was released in Steam last year. And that means that that's like a high bar that you should be aiming for. But if you're to make X game, aim for 3 million, also release it in an arcade setting, also release some sort of educational kind of tool with it as well, or release a tool set for other developers to make VR content, you're diversifying what you're making and thus making sure that you can kind of tap into more revenue streams. Next up. So, virtual reality is an emerging technology, it's an emerging industry, it's an emerging design paradigm, and it's an emerging business model. And what does all this stuff mean? So, as a technology, it's an emerging technology, but it's also kind of experiencing a lot of platform fragmentation. So One of the things that we've seen is platform-exclusive content that's funded by platforms. Some are more benevolent than others or competitive than others when doing this. So you have to really think about who is giving you money and for what purpose and what that exclusivity can mean. So if you can deploy into only one platform in one use case, you're really limiting your ability to get enough money to make the next kind of content for that. And time will tell whether or not these platforms will fund content past their first deployment or for studios to make a second round of content that's based on the first. The other one is about hardware experimentation. So we're seeing a lot of experimental hardware emerging right now, and adoption is basically centered around content use and about the audience size as well. But the hardware manufacturers themselves are looking at different ways of driving up the adoption. So things like 5G use for wireless headsets with the Vive, that's in the pipeline right now, or looking at daisy chaining lighthouses. Even things like hybrid kind of seated to room scale experiences with the Oculus Touch are good examples of how the manufacturers are still experimenting, which means that your content should be quite flexible in how you design it for use with a specific platform or something like that. Next up. Use dictates direction. So what that means is that hardware content and software deployments are often now in virtual reality dictated by who's using it for what purpose and what kind of platform. A lot of these people who are manufacturers of the hardware or developers of content are looking at the return of their investment or how it's adopted or what kind of PR or marketing opportunities are derived from that. So, industry. VR is an emerging entertainment industry. We all know that. That's a simple one to look at. So you're looking at things like IMAX VR, who are opening IMAX VR centers in parallel to deployments of the IMAX centers. You're looking at arcade models that are deploying all across Asia right now, and you're looking at supplementary VR entertainment experiences with film releases as being the norm that some of these larger companies are looking for. In North America, that's a really big thing, but in Asia, it's starting to pick up as well now. It's also So this is a bit of a caveat, and there needs to be an asterisk on this. VR has been being used for training in serious games since the 1960s, which is to say that there are academic experts in the field of virtual reality training and serious games. So there is a lot of a kind of academic body of work that you can rely on when looking at this specific thing. So it's wrong to say it's an emerging sector, but what it is that it's giving a larger number of developers access to consumer-ready VR. So instead of having to rely on a $300,000-$400,000 VR kit for training, you can actually go pick one up from Harvey Norman now and start working on training in serious games for applications for those purposes. That's kind of leveled the playing field for a lot of people. So, someone at their home, for example, can make an automated mining train simulator in their living room and then go and speak to someone like BHP Billiton. We don't advocate that. Don't do that. Make stuff for like nursing and doctors and things like that. Or green energy. Enterprise. So the big thing that we're seeing now is enterprise use. So looking at VR as a tool to empower existing businesses to essentially do more. And that can be a really flexible way of looking at that term. So for example, virtual reality interior design, virtual reality building and construction management, virtual reality overview and automation. These are all things that people are actively looking at. So we're seeing an emerging sector in enterprise for VR, and going back about a year or 2 years ago, there was a lot of speculation about how much enterprise use VR would really get. So obviously augmented reality, for those of you that don't know, in 2020 is going to have the lion's share of the money in the market for enterprise use, but VR is actually quite picking up right now as well, especially to train and onboard staff. So a little factoid is that MYOB does their HR training in virtual reality now for their onboarding. Accountants have the best technology. So it's also an emerging design paradigm. So what it is we're looking at giving more affordances to players. We're giving them the ability to interact with objects in ways that we really have not been able to design for previously. So, you give somebody a sheet of paper in VR, that sheet of paper is actually like a missile weapon at this stage, or they can use it to whack onto things, they can use it to pick up a pen and draw on it, and what they really do is out of your control. So you're trying to define an endpoint and hope that a player will interact with objects and reach that endpoint. That basically applies to whether or not you're working in entertainment or serious games. We've seen people essentially experiment with their environment a lot in VR. Next up, agency. So, people are diverse, which means that virtual reality needs to account for avatars being diverse as well. The big part about virtual reality is making someone believe that they're in an environment. That's a good way of reducing things like simulation sickness, about trying to map your experiences to what a person feels in their kind of physical feedback, and looking at essentially making diverse characters is quite important as well. That's like a whole different talk for VR design, but agency is a very important part about how we have to consider what VR is as an emerging field of experiences, and how we can make somebody feel as though that they're actually present within an environment and that they embody an avatar. Next up is authenticity. So whether you're depicting nursing for people living with Alzheimer's, or you're depicting walking over a tightrope, or in our case depicting being an astronaut, authenticity to subject matter is probably one of the most important parts about design for content in VR. So looking at how you can find the core of what it is that you're trying to depict in virtual reality also helps validate why you're making content for virtual reality, because VR offers people an unparalleled ability to immerse themselves into a specific subject matter, and that is the reason why authenticity is probably one of the chief kind of drivers for making good VR content. And click. Right, business models. So, arcades. Not many people know about this, but arcades in Asia, especially in China, North Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, are actually becoming a very prominent method of deploying to VR centers and giving people access. The population density in these places means that a single arcade is able to sustain itself and deliver experiences. Most of these offer things like revenue share, or they offer licensing. So a game that you make exclusively for arcade use can actually derive a lot of revenue for your business and make a sustainable studio. The next one is consumer sales. So Steam VR, obviously Oculus, the marketplace for the Oculus experiences, these are all good places to push your games. So you should be looking at how you can push onto multiple platforms with multiple marketplaces and multiple installations so that you can kind of cast a wide net. Platform funding. So a lot of platforms are actually giving out money. We're a good example of that. So Opaque Space is the second Opaque kind of media group studio to be funded by HTC Vive to go out and make stuff for virtual reality. We also have a lot of friends that have been working with Oculus and using Oculus content funding, and there's also a lot of opportunities out there. So for example, IMAX has got a $50 million VR content fund that's available to developers to make stuff that's exclusively for IMAX VR centers. We've got people like Noitum, for example, who are shopping around for mixed reality developers to give them money to make stuff for MR. And we've seen a lot of other hardware manufacturers in the pipelines have content funds and grants that are available to developers as well. Now, a lot of these are based upon having prototypes and demos and things like that. So I encourage everyone to go out and make stuff really quickly. That's number one, water. Is this a quick pace for everybody? Is everyone cool at the moment? Yeah, all right. So we don't have too much to get through, but now we talk about the bad stuff, the challenges. So, making VR engaging is probably one of the hardest challenges. A lot of people are engaged for the first couple of minutes, but then it just tapers off. There's a lot of grand claims that are being made by people in terms of how to make engaging VR. The truth of the matter is, if you don't have a reason to be in virtual reality, you're not going to be engaged by it. That applies to training, it applies to serious games, and it applies to entertainment as well. So, for example, with training, people are paid to be in VR, so they kind of have to stay in there. But for entertainment, someone can just take their headset off and walk away. And we've seen a lot of people demo their games only to have people kind of, in a rather flat manner, disengage with the experience and walk away. we have to, as an industry and as content developers, move past the 10, 15-minute experience timelines and start looking at how we're going to make VR games that can last for 3, 4, 5, or 10 hours. And for example, Vive Studios is a publishing arm now in North America that's actually looking to publish VR games that aim for multiples of hours of experiences that are long-form, narrative-driven, and have complex forms of interaction. Because as an industry, we are moving past shooting galleries and 5-10-minute gameplay round experiences. Accessibility is very important for VR. Now, a huge problem with virtual reality right now is that it's very ableist in how interaction methods are designed. And as an industry, we are trying to find ways to get past that. I think that gaze tracking is going to be a really big driver on making virtual reality more accessible to people that that can't access it right now because of multiple reasons. But even things like simulation sickness, we've found that there are some people who just cannot get around it. Some people will be sick no matter what in VR. But there is also a wide spectrum of people who are vulnerable to simulation sickness as well, and finding ways to reduce that is quite challenging. So the easy stuff, low-hanging fruit, is making it 90 FPS, making sure that whatever kind of physical movements happen in that digital environment mapped to what a person is doing with their arms and their head. But also things like the use of text, the use of color, the use of screen-wide effects like bloom, all of these contribute to that spectrum as well. Also, thinking about accessibility, keep in mind that VR is a very wide demographic, so your experiences are going to attract a lot of people. Going back to what I was saying about Earthlight, having a 4-year-old kid jump on and do an EVA, and then having someone who is much older than that jump in and do an EVA, it means that we have to make experiences that allow for a wide demographic of people and audience to come in. So going to like what Lauren was saying, it's about making it accessible to people who are in love with space, for our example. But that will apply to whatever experience that you're making. Like if you're making something based on ninjas, for example, you're actually making VR experiences to people who love being a ninja. So making it sustainable. This is a big thing. Making a VR game or an AR game or an MR game or a hybrid reality game or a tool or an enterprise solution, the biggest challenge is making sure that whatever funding you get, it goes past your first release. One of the big things that we're seeing is one-shot studios that will go up, they'll make something, it'll be a tech demo or a prototype or something, or a release, but then they kind of don't have the funds to continue. Now, as an industry, it's very important for us to start shifting away from the mindset of indie devs who all chip in and work 2 or 3 jobs and try to make a living scraping things together, because we have to be professionals at some stage. Like we have to get to the point where people are earning living salaries from making games or tools or enterprise solutions. That is doubly important for virtual reality because we can't build the foundations of an industry based on unsustainable business practices. We have to make the changes now because 10 years from now, we don't want to be having to address these problems in an ingrained kind of, environment for developers. And making it work. So, fun things about having an emerging technology platform is that every single engine iteration and upgrade will have new exciting bugs. Things will not work. Is Chris Murphy here? Right. Yeah, Unreal Engine, real good. No problems with it. That's water number 2. This is being recorded, right? But it doesn't come out for like a week or 2? Yeah, cool. Yeah, but like with all the engines, they're all experimenting with making VR performant, with making VR accessible and reducing the cost of production overheads for virtual reality. That means that making it work is obviously a challenge because sometimes things will not go according to plan. So, next up. How are we doing for time, by the way? Kind of. Yep, great, okay. Making it engaging. So, you have to make VR engaging for experienced players. This one's quite important because a lot of people have had exposure to virtual reality by this stage, which means that just having very simple interaction methods and core gameplay loops are probably no longer enough to keep someone playing past 5, 10, 15 minutes. Now, you can have secondary loops that help supplement gameplay, but it's advised for you to make a game that can be picked up by a first-time VR user and then scaled up for experienced players to discover new methods of interaction and gameplay. Making it engaging past the novelty of virtual reality, so not relying on having your two hands within VR as the crutch of your gameplay is very important. So looking at things like engaging storytelling, creating engaging environments, trying to explore methods where you kind of subvert what reality and space is. That's where I think one of the stronger kind of elements of virtual reality content creation is going to be. So don't make up, try and find out, distort time, distort space. Look at how someone can benefit from being in VR by playing your game. Because one of the biggest questions that people keep asking, rightfully so, is why is this in VR when it could have just been a mouse and keyboard or a controller-based game? Also, engaging for large audiences. So going back to what I was saying before, virtual reality is an emerging technology, which means a lot of people, especially non-gamers, are interested in accessing content and trying to figure out what the buzz is about. Be inviting and try to have people enjoy your experiences. So a first-time console player should be able to pick up your game and then skill themselves up whilst playing it to understand what it's like to be a VR player or a VR user. Okay. Making it accessible for first-time players, we just covered that. So essentially, you're going to find a lot of people who will pick up a controller for the first time. So using the trigger buttons, the grip buttons, or buttons that people will generally gravitate towards using first is always advisable. Large age groups. So keep in mind that kids, especially very young kids, don't have as good command of their, motor skills as we do, as experienced game developers who are playing emerging technology. So make sure that you're relying on large motions and things like that. Also, what we found is try to have settings in your game that will adjust for different arm lengths, because if you don't do that, you're going to find that relying on things that people have to grab or reach out for is going to make things very inaccessible. That means that little kiddies can't play your game, makes you a bad game developer. Now, and also for the general public, keep in mind that, yes, some of you will go out and make very gore-filled or explicit content in virtual reality. Try to keep in mind that a lot of VR content is getting shown to public audiences right now, and a lot of the exposure for virtual reality content creators is based upon the public having access to your content, either at exhibitions or through streams or through installations and arcade use. I can tell you now that the moment that you make explicit content or content that is offensive or content that targets or discriminates against people, you are not going to any arcade anywhere in the world. We have spoken to the biz dev managers of places like IMAX, and they've been very explicit about curating their content to make it accessible for the general public. Whether or not, however you feel about diversity and politics, we don't give a fuck, because you're just not going to be able to sell your game. Which is a good thing. Anyway, so making it sustainable beyond the first release. That one's super important. Hit that point again. Creating paid jobs. You should make an industry and an economy around virtual reality. If you're building something that's based around exploiting people, around asking for their emotional and free labor, or about trying to, we all pitch in, we all get paid after this game releases, don't do that, okay? No one knows what the successful business model of virtual reality looks like right now. Every 3 or 4 months or 6 months, initiatives that big companies set up get scrapped. Large funds that people allocate get withdrawn, or people restructure their business models. Try to find ways to get the money now, or try to find support mechanisms, and then essentially make paying jobs, or jobs that at least subsidize people's cost of living to work on your content now, as opposed to in the future. Yeah, and driving the industry. So remember, successful businesses and successful content and sustainable business models drive the industry forward. Every single large-scale VR kind of failure is publicized 10 times more than, game studio opens, makes 10 more jobs, as opposed to game studio with 2 people shuts down. The VR industry is collapsing. So keep that in mind. People are quite speculative, and they're waiting to pounce on you as well. So if there's any press in the audience, then I'm watching you. Okay. Make it work past the prototype idea. So we're seeing a lot of tech demos. Keep in mind, a 2-minute, 5-minute tech demo does not constitute a game. Having it work past a tech demo is very challenging. If you're a game designer, you should be crying at night in your sleep. So make it iterative with feedback. So if you go with the waterfall method, you go off, you build your game in a vacuum, you work on it for 12 months, X amount of money, and then you release it to the public. not going to do well because you need feedback. So this whole idea about virtual reality being a very universal technology means that you need to be doing a lot of either closed testing, public testing with like lots of NDAs. You know, you figure that out. But if you're not seeking feedback for your VR content development, you're not going to do well. We have seen a lot of developers prototype something, run with it for 6 months, go to their first round of testing, only to realize that their entire interaction method was completely just out of whack. Remember that you're also working in a changing market. So as content developers, you also need to be business developers as well if you want to make sustainable kind of industries. That means that you need to be keeping a good eye on what the market is doing, how the market is correcting itself, and where speculation is running rampant or where it's actually predicting what's happening with market movements. That means like 8 months ago, I don't think any developer would have taken the idea of arcade deployment seriously. But now in China, we've got 300 plus arcade sites with hundreds of Vives in them each that are essentially charging people $7 per use of an experience per half an hour block. Now, if you're a developer making 30% of that, for example, you're actually not making bad money. You're able to create a sustainable kind of ecosystem around your content. So try to keep a tab on what's happening. If you don't, you're going to fall behind. And with technology, you know, if you're not moving with the pack, you're either moving out in your own direction and innovating, or you're falling behind, basically. So, parting tips. We're still looking for time. Like 2 minutes, 1 minute? Let's go with a couple of seconds. Okay. Yeah, I'll just take my water. So, forget traditional game design, okay? The playing field is level for everybody right now. We're all trying to figure things out. We're all playing with different things, prototyping new methods of doing stuff in virtual reality. The saying is true. There aren't people who are experts in consumer-facing virtual reality, especially with a game design component. There are people that know what they're doing because they've been working in the field for long enough to kind of have acquired enough data points to know what will work and what won't work. But in terms of just normal game design, we don't know what the hell's going on. We're trying to figure it out. A lot of people are looking at like physical play. For example, the most successful games have been games that have been looking at, going essentially back in time and looking at how physical game controllers or arcade game controllers were successful. You know, it's no coincidence that Raw Data and Superhot and things like that are games that derive a lot of their interaction methods from arcade shooters, for example, but that are able to now drive that forward and implement new methods. Yeah, cool. Business model. As I said, forget the traditional business model. Read lots of stuff about VR businesses. Use of space. Remember, you're in VR. It doesn't mean that your little room in VR is what you have to use. Try to think of it as, you know, you can make walk on the walls, walk upside down, or in our case, be in zero gravity. And forget the traditional thing about the definition of games. Your game can be a tool, your game can be an enterprise solution, your game can be deployed over multiple platforms as well. Questions? I'm very harmless. Come up and talk to me. And yeah, I can be reached through Twitter, or you can email hate mail to me in my work desk. Got great spam filter on that one.